Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back. So, our next speaker is Dr. Vandit Kumar Vijay. So, Dr. Vandit Kumar Vijay holds a doctoral degree from IIT Delhi and is currently associated with TU Delft, Netherlands. His research center around making rural areas self-sufficient for energy needs by utilizing locally available surplus biomass resources with the help of different bioenergy technologies. So, this is the short bio of Dr. Vandit Vijay. So, sir, it's my career over to you.
Is my screen visible?
Yes, sir.
Okay, very good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for the introduction. So I hope almost all of you must be able to recognize the person who is in the background of this photo. And we consider him the father of our nation. So it's on his principles and his ideas, uh, which also not just laid back the foundation of our country's independence, but he was also a great visionary and a great thinker when it came to self-reliance, rural areas, and rural development. So in my work also, I've tried to imbibe some of the principles which he laid down, and moving forward, I'll be highlighting on those. So this presentation is on carbon neutral village and energy independence. So we'll skip some of these slides. Uh, so this whole idea is inspired from his vision of Gram Swaraj, which means village self-reliance, which means that every village should be its own republic. It should be independent of others for its own vital wants, yet interdependent for many others for which dependence is necessary. And we worked on the energy aspect of it, that is Gram Urja Swaraj, because energy access is still a big problem in rural areas. And uh, people living in rural areas, they often have to adjust their lifestyle and their occupational activities according to the availability of energy. So first of all, I will talk about carbon neutral village. So this is where we are in my current assignment, we are working. Actually, it's just the beginning of a program which we have launched on carbon neutrality. It's in a state called Kerala. From this figure, you can see at the bottom, it is one of the bottommost states in the country's geography, and a lot of its area is coastal. And so we are working in this particular district called Wayanad, and Minangadi is a panchayat. So a panchayat means a cluster of villages which are there in this district called Wayanad, and it lies in the Western Ghats of India. So Western Ghats are actually one of the 32 biodiversity hotspots of the world, which means this region is very rich in flora and fauna diversity, and yet it's very surprising that it is also one of the climate change hotspots and is highly vulnerable to climate change. So back in 2017, this area faced the worst drought in the century, and then in 2018 it faced heavy mega floods, which also led to a lot of landslides and unfortunate incidents in the area. And after that, every year on year, it is facing a lot of natural calamities, and which can be like climate change can be considered as one of the big reason for this happening so frequently in this area. So that's why this work was started in this area, and it was not this initiative. It was not taken. Was not planned initially by the government. It was actually planned by the local Gram Panchayat, an environmental group present in the area called Thanal, and in cognizance and association with the local communities. So we can also call it a project which started voluntarily with the efforts of the local people, and then later on supported by the government. And this work started way back in 2016-17. So here is a block profile of the area. The population of this particular Gram Panchayat is around 35,000 and it has around 8,000 households. And only around 3% of the area is under forest. And the major crops grown are coffee, pepper. In fact, paddy is also one of the major crops, but coffee is the most important crop grown in the area, which is cultivated in more than 3,000 acres in uh, Minangadi. So when we are talking about carbon neutrality now, like after the COP26 this month, it has become a buzzword. In fact, it was a buzzword, but yeah, it gained more prominence, and every country now wants to become carbon neutral. And every country is also coming out with a lot of INDCs and the timelines for achieving that. But while we have a lot of while we see a lot of efforts on papers, in reality, the situation is not the same, and it's not in line with the efforts which are presented on the paper. And a major reason for that is, yes, we have environment goals and which are very critical, but they also have to align with the economic aspirations and goals. And as most of us here are from developing countries, so we still haven't reached the developmental threshold of our respective nations. So that means that yes, over the coming decades, to become more developed, we are going to rely on activities which are going to be more emission intensive, and they are going to lead to emissions. Yes, we'll be taking actions to curtail those emissions also, but then we also need uh, finance which supports the curtailing of these emission saving activities. So this is in fact one of the major reasons why uh, the environment and economic goals need to go hand in hand, and we can, none of one can precede the other. So in this area, the work started first of all, tunnel which I mentioned, which is the an environmental activist group sort of, and an NGO. They started doing the baseline assessment. They considered different sectors such as transportation, energy, waste, and based on that, they analyzed what are the emissions which are happening in this area on an yearly basis. And using primary data, doing surveys, having students as their volunteers, and also collecting secondary data from the government, they estimated that on an annual basis, around 33,400 tons of CO2 equivalent is emitted in this area. Then they also analyzed what is the current carbon sequestration potential and what are the carbon stocks in this area. For that, they considered the forest in that area, the agriculture, the coffee plantations, which is a major agricultural activity in the area, and the soil carbon content, and homestead trees which are there. The livestock emissions from livestock also they considered. So based on that, they could gather that around 21,000, or let's say 22,000 tons of CO2 was getting sequestered, or there were carbon stocks for that in this area. So which still led to a deficit of around 11,000 or 12,000 CO2 tons of CO2 in this area, which need to be balanced for making it a carbon neutral Gram Panchayat. So they, after this baseline assessment, they decided on all the activities which they were gonna do in the area. And one of the activities was tree planting. So based on their internal studies, they set a goal of planting 5 lakh trees, which is around 500,000 trees in this area in the next 6 years, 6 or 7 years. And I'm happy to share that as of now, they have already planted 3.3 million trees in this area. And so tree plantation, it's now afforestation or tree plantation is happening almost all across the country, and in fact almost in many countries in the world. It's a major activity which is taken up for the name of environment protection, and which is good. But we also need to see the survival rate of the trees and how many of these trees are actually being taken care of as they grow. So one very unique concept which this panchayat started was called tree banking. So under this initiative, what they did was, uh, they set a fixed amount of money. So if a farmer today plants a tree, after 3 years, he will be eligible for a loan, which is around, let's say, slightly less than $1 per tree. And he'll get this amount on an yearly basis so that the growth of the tree is ensured and people are not, so that people don't cut the tree in its early age. So, and this loan will be interest free and it will go on until 10 years. And after that, if a tree has completed 10 years, after that, if the tree is cut, then the farmer doesn't have to repay the loan. And if it is cut before 10 years, then the year in which the tree is cut, he has to pay the amount of money which he got as a loan for its tree. And so for every tree, he gets this amount of money, and the number of trees he grows, based on that, he's eligible for the loan. And this loan is given by the panchayat, and the panchayat got the money from the government. Now, they what they also did was they geotagged the trees. So the coordinates are mentioned, and now, in fact, recently they are also in the process of developing an app on which the data can be logged and the photos can be taken and shared so that people can actually see the growth of the tree and also see, okay, the tree on the basis of which a person is taking loan is actually standing there and it's still growing. So through this activity, they are able to ensure the growth of a tree and the safety of a tree. And also people are now taking interest in growing more and more trees due to this, even beyond the life of the trees, uh, this 10-year period loan. The, and they undertook several other activities such as composting. Uh, so initially, waste management was also a problem in this area because now it is becoming a famous tourist destination. So a lot of tourist influx is there. So people come and they go, but they litter all around. This had become a big problem in the last 3-4 years, but now they've taken several initiatives for that. They're composting all the non-biodegradable waste, biodegradable waste, and the non-biodegradable waste, the one which can be recycled, they are recycling. They have tied up with a local recycling facility, and they're also using some of the plastic waste which is non-recyclable, and it is being used in tarring in road making. So they're using it locally. Then organic farming is being promoted through different channels. There are some research organizations working in the rural setup. They are also taking out some campaigning activities for the farmers and awareness campaigns so that more and more people start switching to organic farming. And they are distributing all these LED bulbs now and replacing the street lights with solar energy based lighting. And they have converted a land within a barren land which belonged to a temple and nearby area into a forest. So these are all the activities which they have been taking up. So now, like I mentioned, that environment and economy have to go hand in hand. So till now, a lot of these efforts which they have been made, there are all expenditures, so for which some cost is incurred by someone. So now how to save that cost or to replenish that much amount of money which one is spending, or even if the government is spending. So one another thing, a very unique thing which they have come up is they're planning to grow, since coffee is the major activity, agricultural crop grown in this area, they are trying to get a carbon neutral tag for the coffee which they are making. And they're planning to sell this coffee uh, domestically or even export this coffee with this carbon neutral tag to get a higher amount of return for this coffee per kg unit. And there are people actually in Europe or other countries who have started showing interest in buying this coffee if it comes with a carbon neutral tag because of the sustainability goals all across different countries. And so what else they're trying to do? In fact, one of the things that we are also supporting them is that how to make coffee farms carbon neutral. So from same piece of land, how we can have more climate stabilization, food security by going through agroforestry approaches within the same piece of land, growing different species of trees, native species mostly, and also how to generate energy from this piece of land. So from the same piece of land, you'll get your coffee. You'll also get some other fruit or some other product from the different trees which are grown in the area. And from the biomass which is available, the surplus biomass within that area, how we can generate energy which can be used locally uh, in a decentralized way. So here are some pics from this area. So you can see the tags which have been put up. So these are the geo tags. So volunteers go, they did a survey of all the trees which were there, and then for every new tree which is planted, a tag is provided. And here's a farmer who has actually been able to claim some of the loan based on these geo tags which are provided. And in the right side of the tree, you can see a student volunteer who is checking the tag, and also maybe uh, sometimes they take photos and upload these pics on the app so that it can be based from the cloud, it can be accessed by anywhere. And this is the temple which I was mentioning about. So this land around the temple, it used to be pretty barren, and there were very few trees around. But based on the community initiatives for this carbon neutral activities, they have grown trees around this temple, and now it looks so green. So this is in fact 1.5 years old photograph. And on the left you can see, so they one major activity earlier, there was no vegetable cultivation in this area, but so it had to be brought in, transported from outside. But now they're also growing a lot of vegetables within this panchayat area, so that they are trying to become self-sufficient in many of the vegetables which are consumed on a larger scale. And on the right you can see some of the coffee beans, which is the major activity. And I know that a lot, like some of the people from Ethiopia are attending here, and I think they are also one of the major coffee producing nations in the world. So such kind of projects, if appropriate, may be taken up there as well. So now I'll move to other part of my presentation, which is on energy self-reliance, and it was based on my PhD work here in IIT Delhi. And I'll skip some of the slides which are not uh, relevant. So like I mentioned earlier, that in this work, we focused on the energy aspect of energy self-reliance in a rural area. So to see how we can bring energy self-sufficiency in, so that people don't have to adjust their lifestyles and their activities, uh, was the major aim for taking up this work. And till now, largely a centralized energy planning based top-down approach was followed, which hardly had any interlinkages with the rural ecosystem or any specific target locality. But now rural areas, they are well endowed with natural resources such as solar, biomass, hydel, or wind, based on the region and locality, which can be used for generating decentralized energy. And rural population, then using this decentralized energy, they can plan, produce, or use this energy as per their own needs and desires, uh, instead of depending upon the supply from some outside area, which is many a times is not in tune with their activities planned. So my aim was basically to develop a system of bioenergy technologies which could meet the local energy demands using locally available biomass resources. So for that, I also took a case study of another rural block in the northern part of the country, close to Delhi, around 100 kilometers from here. And I also considered IT Delhi campus as a case study. And the methodology which are followed for this rural energy self-sufficiency, it can be followed for any rural area. It involves the identification of the biomass resources in the selected area, and which can come from agriculture residues, livestock manure, horticulture residues, or any forest, open forest which are there. And then we select what, depending upon the end users, what kind of energy technologies are available, identifying those, and also analyzing the potential for energy generation using these biomass resources. So our main aim was to use the existing knowledge on biomass and to build upon it. So initially, I did a survey of tree species to identify new resources for biomass generation. So I carried out this species survey in some of the neighboring states of Delhi as well as Delhi. And my blog case study belonged to this state called UP, Uttar Pradesh. And these are the four different species which I finally selected based on my survey. And we selected these because these are all fast growing tree species, and they require less water to grow, and they grow very quickly. So moreover, they are very drought resistant, heat resistant, and they grow on wide variety of soils. So these species are called Acacia nilotica, Albizia lebec, Prosopis juliflora, and Leucaena leucocephala. I think maybe in many of the country participating here, some of these trees may be growing in your location as well, because two of these species, namely Prosopis juliflora and Leucaena leucocephala, they are actually not native to India. They are exotic. They used to be exotic species, but have now become naturalized. So initially, they were brought in from Mexico and Australia around a century back, and they have grown very fast. In fact, in some of the places, in many places in the country where they were earlier grown to increase the forest cover or for timber purposes many decades back, now they have become highly predatory and invasive species. And in some of the states, systematic weeding out of these trees is being carried out to control their unchecked growth, because they very adversely affect the groundwater levels, and also they don't let the native flora and fauna to grow in this area. So this was one of the reasons for selecting these tree species, to check their uncontrolled growth and to protect the local ecology. And based on that, so we did a survey and we found out if any previous work had been carried out around these seeds for energy, and we could not find such work. So we thought of uh, so the all these seeds are, they are very small in size, and they are hard. So we thought of going for biogas production from them, because the oil content was very less. It's around 5 to 6% maximum in these seeds. So you can see, and this is one of the other species which was available in the area called Pongamia pinnata, which was selected. This was Pongamia pinnata is now a known non-edible biomass resource for biodiesel production, and a lot of work has already been carried out. So this seed, it has around 35 to 40% of seed oil content, which can be used for biodiesel production. But still, in India, around 2 decades back, there was a lot of focus on biodiesel production using Pongamia pinnata and one more tree called Jatropha. However, when we considered way back, even till now, we only used to consider Pongamia pinnata for biodiesel production. So this is a very versatile fruit, which can which comes in a shell, and once we have taken expelled the oil out of it, what remains is a de-oiled seed cake. So this de-oiled seed cake, in fact, can also be used for energy generation, and the Pongamia shells which are there, in which the seed comes, that can also be used for energy generation, maybe through gasification or other measures. So when we are only using Pongamia oil, we are actually only using 35% of the energy content of this fruit. But by using the de-oiled seed cake and the Pongamia shells, we can actually capture the entire total resource uh, energy potential from this Pongamia. And in our lab, in my seniors, they have also worked on using Pongamia shells for gas through biomass gasification, and they have also explored de-oiled seed cake for anaerobic digestion for biogas production. And in fact, they have found excellent results. So we have a large 20 cubic meter biogas plant, which is run daily on this de-oiled seed cake in our IIT Delhi campus. These are some basically some news clippings showing the Prosopis and Leucaena, how they became invasive, and whatever forests we have in Delhi now, almost 70% of that uh, are now has been taken over by only by these two species. Yeah, so starting with the experimentation, as I said that we uh, focused on biogas production from these seeds, and we also took cattle manure because that is the most commonly used feedstock and is an ideal benchmark for comparison when we think of anaerobic digestion from these seeds. So we did the proximate and the ultimate analysis, and based on that, we found that the volatile solid content in these seeds is very high, and total solid contents also. So it is the TS content is almost 5 times of what we get in cattle manure, because that has a lot of moisture content. And we also did the ultimate analysis to find the CHN content and the C/N ratio. So this is one challenge with these seeds, because the ideal feedstock C/N ratio is around 20 to 25:1, but in all these seeds they are nitrogen rich, and the C/N ratio was in the range of 6.8 to 8.4, let's say. And but we didn't want to go for co-digestion initially, so we thought of proceeding with the monodigestion mode for anaerobic digestion exploration, and we started with the experiments. So initially, the first set of experiments, they were carried out in these glass bottle reactors to check the feasibility of gas production, and the only pre-treatment which we did was the pulverization of these feedstocks. So they were pulverized to a powdered form to increase their degradation and improve the conversion efficiency. Now, major set of, since we plan to work in rural areas, so we wanted to move beyond the lab and these small glass bottle reactors. So major set of our experiments were carried out in these large 300-liter feed level biogas digesters. These are the digesters which we use for experimentation using all these seed feedstocks. Now, startup of any new substrate is a challenge, because they do not have the inherent bacteria which are otherwise available in cattle manure, which support the anaerobic digestion process and the methanogenation. And since these seeds, we can see from the C/N ratio that they are nitrogen rich, so there is a risk of ammonia inhibition in them. So we initially we inoculated all of these digesters with cattle manure. So they were initially started, they were fed at 5% TS. The TS, optimal TS, we also got from the glass bottle reactor experiment. So we tried that with 5%, 10%, and 15% TS. And we found that 5% TS was the most optimal. And in higher TS ranges, there was anaerobic digestion failure, because we could not get a lot of methane content and gas production. So here we started on cattle manure, and then we left these plant as it is. There was no new feeding done after initial loading of these digesters, and then we left them as it is for 30-40 days, and then the gas production started based on the cattle manure which was there. And then finally it got down because there was no new feeding done. And around 35 to 40 days after the initial loading of these digesters, there was no gas production. And this then we started feeding these digesters with the seed. The daily stepwise feeding of the seeds was started, and this was done because we wanted to inoculate these digesters with cattle manure and the microbes which could help in anaerobic digestion process. And we could see with time after the feeding of seeds was started that microbes, they adjusted their metabolism to the properties of these new seed feedstocks, because the gas production started, and also the gas volume started increasing. So we ran these experiments for a period of 3 months after the feeding of seeds was started. So here day one represents when the first day when the seeds were fed to these digesters. And we can see that over a period of 3 months, the gas production, the methane content in biogas was more than 50%. On an average, it was around 52 to 53%, at par with what we get with cattle manure. And we did for 3 months so that we could see if there were, with time, if there were any drop downs or any failures in the plant. This graph here shows the specific biogas yield in meter cube per kg Vs, and we can see that the biogas yield in green is for cattle manure. So the yield for all of these seeds was at least more than around 1.5 times more than what we have for cattle manure, and it was around 0.4, 0.42, 0.43 meter cube per kg Vs for these seeds. And this is the volatile solid mass removal efficiency. Even that for cattle manure for a period of 3 months, it was around 30%, whereas for all the seeds which we selected was close to 45%, showing that their degradation was more efficient. Now, because we selected these 4 different seeds, and different. Now, from the previous graph, we have seen that the gas component, the gas composition, as well as the gas yield, they work like quite close to each other. This can be attributed maybe because these trees, they belong to the same family and subfamily, and they grow in similar climatic conditions, and their composition of the seeds is also uh, in quite close to each other. So we thought of going for interchangeability of these seeds in a mixed breeding mode, where one single biogas plant, it was fed with each of these seed species for a period of 30 days successively. That means again, this plant we started with cattle manure, and from second then around after 1 month we started feeding all these seeds which we had selected. So first 1 month we fed Acacia nilotica, then we fed Prosopis, and so on. So over the 4 month period where we fed this one single plant with all of these seed species, we can see that the methane content was still quite high. Over a period of 4 months, on an average, it was close to 54%, and the specific methane yield was also close to what we got for individual tree seeds, indicating that when we are using these seeds, we can practice interchangeability. Now, this helps us in several ways. First of all, we are able to avoid the seasonality challenges because different seeds are available during different seasons of the year. And any of the seeds which are available, they can be fed to the same plant, and the plant operation can be sustainably ensured. And also, other advantages in using the seeds are that their storage is easy, they can be stored for years, they can be easily transported, and there are no leaching losses unlike cattle manure or any loss of nutrients, and less storage space is required, which is a major challenge with cattle manure. So this way, we were able to find these four new uh, tree species seeds which could be used for biogas production, and they are actually quite important species also because in India, three of these species, they are in the top 10 growing tree species in tree outside forest category, which means we have a huge population of these tree species in our country. And I'm sure that maybe some of these trees are maybe growing in different countries, and you can actually check in your country if these trees are available. They can be explored for biogas production. So our next set of experiment was for biodiesel production. Like I said, we have Pungamipin other trees available within the IIT campus, and also in the block which I had selected for my study, the BB Nagar block. So that was the reason for using that species again for energy generation. And we followed a simple single stage transesterification process for biodiesel production. These were the reaction conditions. And initially, we made biodiesel in these small glass bottle reactors just to accustom ourselves for the process of biodiesel production. And later on, we moved to these large 10-liter biodiesel reactors. So our main aim was actually to generate large amount of biodiesel, which we could use for energy generation purposes. And we had this biodiesel reactor, and in the right most figure, you can see that we have used this for large biodiesel production. So uh, the bottom part is the glycerol, which is a byproduct of this process, and the upper part is biodiesel. And in fact, glycerol also has a lot of potential applications. It can be used in cosmetics, pharmaceuticals. Also, uh, there are now experiments being carried out using it for in small quantities for to enhance the bio gas production process. And these were some of the properties which we tested for the biodiesel which we had produced. We tested mainly the kinematic viscosity, the uh, calorific value, and we found almost all of these to lie in the range which is specified within the ASTM standards for biodiesel. So our experiments till now were focused on using locally available biomass resources for biofuel production, and next set of our experiments was on using these biofuels for localized energy generation. So for that we got two diesel engines and of 7.4 kilowatt capacity, and we converted one of these engines to a 100% biogas engine and the other engine to a dual fuel engine. And all these conversions were done in house because in our IC engine lab we have uh, people who are already well conversed with the engine conversion process. So we didn't go and buy already converted engines, but we converted these engines in-house. Now, converting to a dual fuel engine is simple. It doesn't require many changes in the engine design. Only a gas mixer was connected at the inlet manifold, but a 100% biogas engine requires substantial modifications because also its auto ignition temperature is high with biogas. So we have to remove the spark plug, we have to introduce an injector, then we have to remove all the fuel supply line, fuel tanks, and fuel pump. Then there is a reduction in compression ratio. So the compression ratio of a diesel engine was around 17.5, but for biogas it was brought down to 12. And then we have to introduce an air fuel mixing mechanism, that is a gas carburetor, and also an ignition system was mounted on the crankshaft. And so uh, we were running these engines on the 100% biogas engine is of course run on biogas. Both we were running it on raw biogas as well as upgraded biogas, which we have here. And the dual fuel engine that we ran on 4 different fuel combinations. We ran it on diesel raw biogas, diesel enriched biogas, biodiesel raw biogas, and biodiesel enriched biogas. And apart from diesel raw biogas, enriched biogas, and biodiesel, which we produced here, so all these fuels which we are producing, we're using those to test our engines. And one more thing, generally, when we are testing engines, we use an engine setup, but here, so this was the original engine which we got, and this is the engine after conversion. This was the dual fuel engine, and in the right figure, you can see a gas mixer, which is shown at the top towards the left side in the second photo. That was the only modification in the engine, and this is schematic diagram. And yeah, this is the 100% biogas conversion engine. In here, you can see that a lot of parts have been opened and a lot of parts have been introduced separately. In fact, we had to introduce a blower for engine cooling because the basic design of the original engine was not suitable for uh, conversion that much, and so we had to remove the cooling uh, mechanism, and that's why we had to bring in this blower, which is shown in the blue. This yeah, and this is a large 25 cubic meter biogas plant, which is available in one of our labs in the campus, where we are collecting food waste from the campus and from the campus households, and that is being pulverized and used to run this biogas plant daily. So every day, the waste management trolley, which goes around the campus, that collects this waste from all the households, it's brought down here, and we are pulverizing it. You can, in the right, you can see the original waste which we got, and also the pulverized waste, and this waste is being used to run this plant, and this plant is now running successfully from the last 3-4 years without any major problems. And yeah, so what we did was we connected these engines with the electricity panel of our lab, because we wanted to test these engines in real-time conditions. We did not go for a just for an experimental setup, but we were testing it at the live load of the lab. So we did the like appropriate connections. And these graphs here, they show the engine performance. It shows the big thermal efficiency and the specific fuel consumption for raw biogas. So the maximum efficiency which we got was around 22.5% when we were running the 100% biogas engine on raw biogas. And yes, there is a power derating. Almost 40 to 50% derating is there in when we are using biogas, because it has a lower calorific value, and also uh, when we are introducing biogas, the amount of uh, oxygen which is there uh, otherwise that is getting replaced by biogas. So oxygen availability for combustion becomes lower. And these are the dual fuel engine uh, performances for the different fuel combinations which we took, and we can see that for raw biogas and biodiesel and diesel combinations, the maximum efficiency was around 20%, but for enriched biogas, when combined with diesel or biodiesel, it was around close, the maximum efficiency was close to 25%. So this is a whole set. This slide here shows the whole setup for how we could make our lab self-sufficient using the uh, biogas and biodiesel which we were producing from within the campus, and also the raw material which we were using, though that was available from us within the campus. All these trees which I had selected for the experiment, they are available in IT Delhi campus in large numbers. In fact, we did a tree survey and we also found the count of these trees. And so we are collecting those seeds, we're producing biogas, we are using the food waste from within the campus for producing biogas, and we're producing biodiesel from Pongamia, which is also available. And we have converted these engines in-house, and then these engines were used to produce electricity for this lab. So whenever we were testing the engines, our lab became independent from the grid, and it was a completely decentralized unit. So this way, we were actually able to make our lab energy self-sufficient using the locally available biomass resources. So this was a demonstration of the idea which we were proposing. And then, like I mentioned, that I took a case study, and this was the case study area. Here you can see that in India, the green area, which is the state called Uttar Pradesh, and within that, this district is there called Bulandshahr, and within that district is the uh, block called BB Nagar, which was finally selected. It's around 120 kilometers from Delhi, and this block was selected because we were able to establish contact with some of the farmers in the local administration who could actually help us in carrying out surveys. So our main aim here was to analyze what are the different biomass resources available, what could be the surplus of these biomass resources, and do a theoretical case study to find out what is the bioenergy generation potential in a rural block. This is the block profile. So this block is in an area of around 16,000 acres and hectares. Sorry, and this is a population of around zero point 0.1 million. There are 41 villages, so it's a cluster of villages, and the cattle population is close to 65,000. And agriculture is a major activity in this area, and that can also be seen from cropping intensity is quite high. It's 170%. The major crops grown here are wheat, rice, and sugarcane, then maize, pulses also. And all the trees which we have selected are also available in this area in large numbers. In fact, we also did a survey with the help of the forest department there to estimate the number of trees for each of these species in the block. These are few glimpses from the block. Here you can see that though that this block is only around 120 kilometers from Delhi, still it is not a very developed block. Cattle driven carts are still being used in this area for both uh, human transportation, also for carrying their agriculture produce from one place to another. And in the rightmost figure at the top, you can see that these traditional cook stoves are being used, and in almost every household, the food is made on these stove. They do have LPG connections in many of the household, but that is not the primary fuel for food for cooking in these areas. And you can see from the black walls that it is actually because they're highly inefficient and a lot of smoke is generated. The both the walls as well as the utensils uh, get this black color, and also it severely affects the health of the women and the infants who are there in the household. And the cattle manure is left to dry in this area, which could actually be used for currently it's used for fueling these cook stoves, but it can be used suppose if for biogas production. And one of the farmers which we were interviewing, he was a very progressive farmer doing organic farming from the last couple of years. And he's a simple farmer, not very highly uh, rich farmer, a normal farmer. And he was very innovative. And as the rightmost figure in the bottom, you can see the two blue drums which are there. So based on his knowledge and his uh, interactions with people, he has uh, like made this biogas plant. So this is a biogas plant, yeah, and from discarded material. So in his household, the food is made using this biogas, and there is no health problem in his house, and like he was able to do it very cheaply. And this is what we can call a real frugal innovation. So when we are working in rural areas, we also need to uh, take into account the local materials which are available, the local conditions, the economy, and everything. And based on that, we should be able to design So yeah, so it's very important as researchers working in rural areas that we do need-based research so that the technologies or the ideas we propose, they suitably align with the utility of the user. So this was the model which we used for biomass estimation. We estimated what was the crop production, what is the residue ratio, then what is the surplus residue factor, which was used from the government records. And then we found out what is the calorific value of these feeds, different agricultural residues. And similarly for biogas also, based on the cattle population and the amount of cattle manure which was produced, we did similar analysis and we were able to find what is the biomass power potential in this area using the surplus biomass. So for none of the because biomass, it has several competing uses. It is used for fuel, fodder, fertilizer, thatching, construction. Uh, the maximum surplus biomass which we considered for our calculations was 30%. So the 70% of the biomass can still be used for several other competing uses. And similarly for cattle manure, we considered a collection efficiency of 50% and not more than that. And for the seeds also, we considered a collection efficiency of 40%, and the remaining 60% could still we thought, okay, they should be left for other purposes. So based on our analysis, we were able to find that from these different from agriculture residues, there was a power potential of 2.3 megawatt in this area, and we considered a conservative conversion efficiency of 20% for this. For cattle manure, it was around 1.76 megawatt, which is this was based on our engine experiment and the thermal efficiency which we got, and based on considering the surplus biomass only. And for other agriculture residues, similarly, and tree seeds. So all these calculations, they were done based on the experiments which were done in our lab. We were not using outside conversion factors for arriving at these calculations. So we found that the total power potential in the area was around 5.7 megawatt. And currently, when we were doing the survey back in 2019 in this area, the power requirement of the block was around 5.5 megawatt, which we got from the block development office records. So we could actually see that only using the surplus biomass resources in this area, we could completely meet the power potential power requirements in this area if we are able to put a project there. So this shows that rural areas, it may vary, of course, but in this particular area, it can be made energy self-reliant using only the resources which are available within the block. Now, this is also one of the area where even like 10 days ago, or even now, some of the biomass resources are burned for clearing the field quickly and for growing wheat. So because paddy cultivation, it has been harvested. So crop residue burning is a major problem in this area also. And if we're able to provide alternative uses which a farmer also finds practical and income generating for them, or in some kind benefiting, uh, then they can resort to these issues. So there's a need that government comes up with policies which actually support these farmers, and then they'll be able to avoid this burning, and we'll have maybe a more cleaner November every year in Delhi and all its surrounding states. So this was the work which was done, and thank you. Now I'm open to any questions that are there.
Dear participants, if you have any question, please ask.
If I may.
Yes, please.
Thank you for your presentation, Doctor. If I take you back on the first slide, we made a presentation on tree tagging for tagging of trees for, I think, carbon capture. Sorry, carbon, yes, on the tree tagging. So my thinking is, what happens in cases where the geotag on the tree is lost and the tree is probably grown out of from the previous photo? for the sake of transparency, how are such cases addressed? Yes, that's the slide. Geotagging.
Yeah, so
What happens
now
when the yes, please.
that's why they have come up with this app now. So every tree which is grown now, its data is also logged into the app. So it is now available with the panchayat officials, the farmer, anyone who wishes to see what is the real status of the tree. And these student volunteers which are there, they actually do these rounds every 2 or 3 months. They go around, they keep a tab of the tags which were there if there is any problem, and then they also log all this data into the app, so that there is transparency and there are no uh, going around all these things. So earlier for 3-4 years this app was not there, but now they have started using this app, mobile app for this. Hello, does that answer your question?
Yes, doctor. Thank you very much.
Any more questions?
Doctor, a last one. On the coffee that is
Yeah.
exported under the green tagging, I'm assuming some of the coffee that's grown by the farmers is exported outside the country.
Yeah.
Do the proceeds get back to the original farmers, or maybe there's a government guarantee and funding that caters for that in between process?
Yes, yes, yes. So actually, the main aim of this entire exercise is not just carbon neutrality, but also how to increase the income of the farmers. So we have here self-help groups in which, let's say, uh, a number of farmers they decide to come together and bring a cooperative. And so what is being done is buyers from outside who are interested, they are being introduced to these small group of farmers for their requirements, and they can through government channels they can sell it to them directly. So there is no many middlemen who are involved, and they are able to fetch much high, I mean they will be able to fetch much higher returns. So if now today they are getting around $1 per kg of coffee beans, this is the current rate here, but what they are being offered is almost 1.5 times to twice of that. So and these proceeds are directly going to the farmers. Yeah.
Thank you very much, doctor.
Okay.
So I think there's no more questions. If there's question, then I will write to you, sir. Thank you, sir, for your informative and insightful talk. I believe all the participants will be taking this learning into their respective fields. We truly appreciate your time and here with us today. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for listening to the lecture. And I hope, like maybe uh, from at least from these experiences, maybe if you are a coffee growing nation, or maybe you would like to take these ideas forward in your country as well, because climate change is not not just a local problem, but it's a global problem. So maybe it's helpful for all. And also these species which I showed, maybe you can look around in your countries and see if they are available in large numbers. Maybe you can also explore their use for energy generation locally based on their alternative uses. Yeah. So that's my request to everyone. And thank you so much.